This morning, we're continuing our summer series titled On Solid Ground. Our summer preaching series is focusing on who God is. And I know we're in a church, so that probably sounds like the most obvious sentence that anyone has ever said from this pulpit. But I mean something in particular than that, more particular. Not just that God exists or that God is good, not just in a vague way. We say things are good when we don't want to think too hard about them. I mean the characteristic of God, the texture of God, who God has shown God's self to be over and over long before any of us showed up. Now here's my confession. And it's as good a place as any to start when the anxieties start swirling, and they have been swirling for me, and I suspect for some of you. The only thing that has ever made sense or ever made me braver or more gentle than I actually am on my own is setting my sights on God. Not on my own resolve, not in gritting my teeth and getting through it, but on God. So that's where I want us to start today together as a congregation that's still trying to learn each other's names. And I'll be honest with you about something else, because you're new to me and I'm new to you, and I'd rather start plainly. Ministry is a strange thing to be doing right now. Some days I meet people who are more alive to God than they've ever been. Something has cracked open in them and they can't stop talking about it. And then the very same week, I meet people who have quietly closed the door to all of it, who used to pray and don't pray anymore, who used to trust something larger than themselves and now trust only what they can see and control. And both of those people might be sitting near you right now. And I want to assure you this, that both of you are very welcome here. You are in good company. There has been a shift, and I think most of us have felt it even if we couldn't name it. It used to be unremarkable that people in these pews disagreed with each other about plenty. Politics, money, how to raise children, which way the country ought to go, which music to sing on a Sunday. It used to be pretty unremarkable. It was just what a congregation was, a strange, stitched-together family that didn't get to pick each other. But something has changed. People who used to work side by side for a shared good across denominations, across faiths, across the aisle, are being cast as enemies instead of neighbors on the world stage. Reaching towards someone different from you, which used to look like faithfulness, now sometimes gets called weakness, or worse, betrayal. And underneath all of that, ordinary life keeps happening. The immorality and greed and fear that gets sold to us wrapped up in religious language. The violence that flares up in one city and then another, and people from every corner of the map of power reaching for the name of Jesus to justify things that don't always look like Jesus. And I think somewhere underneath all our noise, we know we weren't built to be this splintered. And yet here we are. So many of us trading prayer for scrolling, trading peace for the kind of low-grade, everyday war footing, just to get through a Tuesday. And I want to tell you the truth about my own tension, since I'm new here and you deserve to know what you're getting. Part of me wants to build a wall around this hour on a Sunday, that just for one morning a week we keep the news and the noise and the catastrophizing outside these doors. Let this be the one place we get to breathe. But then there's another part of me, a part that's shaped by a faith tradition that has never once in 2,000 years been quiet in the face of tyranny, even when sometimes those tyrants were claiming spiritual authority. It's propelling me in that faith and that tradition that knows that we just can't close the door and call it faithfulness. Both of those impulses are sitting in me this morning, and I imagine some of them are sitting in you too. So this is where I want to take us, to a very old song. The Bible has a whole book of them, the Psalms. a hymnal that's been sung by people in bomb shelters and delivery rooms and deathbeds for thousands of years. And we read one just a few minutes ago, Psalm 46. It was written and sung long before any of us were a thought in anyone's mind. In a moment every bit as anxious as ours, full of the same greed, the same despair, the same temptation to hate the neighbor. These songs were never meant to be simply a summer playlist we hum along to. They are how God's people have always learned who God actually is and who we are called to become. Psalm 46 doesn't ask us to pretend the world is fine. It doesn't hand us a bumper sticker and call it hope. What it does, and this is the thing I want us to sit with together this morning, it teaches us to look straight at actually what's happening, then to lean hard on the one thing that has ever held any of us steady. Not a program, not a personality, not me, brand new in the pulpit and still learning where the light switches are, but God. Solid, unmoved, still calling the whole aching world back to God's own self, still inviting tired people to put their weight down and rest. Now think for a second about the last time you were stuck in traffic. What'd you see out the windshield? What'd you smell? What was playing or what was not playing on the radio? Now think of a different kind of jam, the one that comes out of nowhere. Not rush hour, not the regular crawl you've learned to expect down Waterdown Road when the construction's going, but the one where you're cruising along and then, with no warning at all, you're not. We were on a road trip recently, and there was a Saturday like that. Clear sky, good road ahead, that drive where you roll the windows down and you switch on the cruise control. And then, out of absolutely nowhere, the car in front of us touched their brakes, and the car in front of that one touched theirs too. And within about 90 seconds, we were sitting completely still, engines idling, staring at a wall of taillights and a thin ribbon of black exhaust curling up out into the blue sky. Now, somewhere ahead of us, it turned out there had been an accident. On the other side of the median, we weren't even in the lane where it happened. We were caught up in the back up of people slowing down to look, the specific human compulsion to crane your necks toward disaster, even when it has nothing to do with you. Now imagine we'd climbed a tree at the edge of that road. From up there, we might have seen the wreck itself, realized it was smaller than we'd feared, already being cleared. We might have seen the open road just beyond it, waiting. Now, if we'd gone up a little further, into a helicopter, say, we might have seen something truer still, that the jam we were sitting in was just one small local snarl, and that every other road on our route, every other stretch of our actual journey was moving freely. Now that's what these old songs do for us, these psalms. They lift us up out of the specific traffic jam we're stuck in, whatever it is this week, and they let us see it from a little higher up. They don't try to erase it or pretend the wreck didn't happen, just to see it at the right scale, a God's-eyed view instead of a windshield view. And I want to say it plainly. Trouble doesn't have to mean war on the evening news for it to count as trouble. For most of us, most weeks, trouble looks a lot smaller and a lot closer than that. It looks like standing in the cereal aisle, doing math in your head and coming up short again. It looks like lying awake at 11:30 because your 14-year-old won't talk to you anymore and you don't know if that's normal or the beginning of something new. It looks like the phone call you're dreading from the doctor's office, or the one you're dreading from your grown kid, or the quiet dread of opening a bank app before your coffee's even ready. That's the traffic jam most of us are actually sitting in on any given Tuesday. Windows up, hands on the wheel, staring at taillights, wondering how bad the wreck up ahead really is. Now here's the trouble with sitting in traffic, though. Whether it's the literal kind or the kind made of grocery bills and worried children, our brains They convince us. They convince us that we can see the whole picture right from where we're sitting. But we can't. All we can actually see is the bumper in front of us. And there's a name for part of what happens in us. It's called confirmation bias. The researchers, they've named it. They can tell how our minds are wired for efficiency, not accuracy, and so they go looking for evidence that confirms what they already fear. Our brains quietly discard whatever might suggest we're safer or more surrounded by grace than we think. We are, almost all of us, better at spotting the threat than the clear road just past it. Now, this isn't a moral failing. It's just what a tired, overloaded human brain does, and what it's always done, since long before anyone had a name for it. Which is exactly why we need old songs like this one. Songs that were written specifically to retrain a frightened people to lift their eyes above the tree line, to see the world the way God sees it, rather than the way our windshield does. They weren't worried about geopolitics as an abstraction any more than you are. They were worried back in the Bible times about whether the rains would come in time for the wheat, whether their sons would come home from the border, whether the coming year would bring famine or something like peace. Trouble, ancient or modern, always shows up first in the particulars. A field, a child, a harvest, a fear that won't let you sleep. It's the register this psalm was written in, not think tanks, but kitchen tables. The historical moment behind this song is one long, exhausting stretch of one crisis after another. Israel was caught for generations in the shadow of a much bigger neighbor, Assyria, a nation that had grown wealthy and fearsome by manipulating markets, seizing resources, and swallowing smaller territories whole. Does that sound familiar, friends? And for a while, the smaller nations banded together, and it worked, more or less. Assyria went through 3 kings in a row, 3 kings who weren't especially interested in conquest. And for about 40 years, nearly 2 generations, the smaller nations got to just live. They built things. They had time and money for something other than defense. And they knew, some of them for the first time in their lives, what it felt like not to brace for the next blow. And then, as it does, leadership shifted again, and the old fear came roaring back. The coalitions scrambled to reform. The warnings that had sounded almost theoretical for 40 years suddenly felt very real again. We can read about all of this in the book of Isaiah. And the people had to decide in that moment of fear whether they would keep trusting a God of peace or reach for those same tactics, the same fear, the same stockpiling, the same hardening as the empire that was threatening them. This song is what it sounds like to climb into a helicopter in the middle of it all. Now, in the world where the psalm was written, people believed the mountains themselves held up the sky. So when the poet imagines mountains shaking and falling into the heart of the sea, it wasn't a weather report. It's the worst thing anyone in the world could picture. Closer to what we might mean by nuclear winter or the climate tipping past the point of return than any ordinary disaster, this psalm was baked in worst-case scenarios. And into that worst-case scenario, international chaos, maybe even cosmic chaos, this song makes one stubborn claim that God can be trusted anyway. It promises, of all things, that the raging, threatening waters, the very thing ancient people feared most, chaos and flood and drowning, will become rivers that make a city glad. The threat becomes the thing that waters the garden. Now, this psalm insists against everything the ancient world assumed about strong leadership, that the true measure of a good ruler was whether they could bring their people peace. Verse 9 says, God, imagined here as a warrior no less, is a warrior for peace, not for war. Israel, like almost every nation before or since, kept reaching for security from military strength. And this song teaches us something almost unbearably countercultural, that the weapons get laid down, not picked up, that armor was never really where safety came from, even when it looked that way. And verse 9 has a phrase you've probably heard set to music, printed on a coffee mug, stitched on a pillow. Be still and know that I am God. That song, be still and know that I am God. We know that song, so many of us. And it's lovely. But a closer translation is less like a spa retreat and more like a command shouted across a battlefield. Stop. Throw down your weapons. Depend on God. Now, this psalm is not toxic positivity. It is not looking away. It is a clear, direct-eyed, clear, conscienced confrontation with the real danger of its day and a stubborn refusal to meet that danger with more fear, more weaponry, more hardening. It faces the storm without flinching, then it insists stubbornly that God is for us, for peace, for refuge, for strength, and that none of it is weakness. We know this reading holds up, by the way, because Jesus said the same thing in a different key. To live inside the reign of God is to stake your security on Him, not on your possessions or your portfolio or your alarm system or the stockpiling of anything. Reaching for war as a strategy has never been compatible with the gospel of Jesus Christ. And now here is where I want to slow it all the way down, because this is the part I actually came here to say to you. What does any of this have to do with a Tuesday? What does it look like on a Wednesday? Not in the halls of government, not in the pages of history, but in your kitchen, in your car, in the school pickup line, in the space between waking up and reaching for your phone. And I think it looks like this. It looks like a half-second pause before you open that banking app, where instead of bracing, you breathe. And you remember that the number on the screen, whatever it is not the whole truth about who you are, about whether you're loved or whether you're provided for. It looks like sitting across from a teenager who won't talk. And instead of pushing or panicking or reaching for the fear that says, I'm losing them, you climb the tree for just a second. You remember that this particular jam, this particular silent, slammed door, maybe is a season and not the whole road. And that there's more road ahead than the half a kilometer you can currently see. It looks like standing in a grocery store parking lot, engine running, doing the math again on what's left in the account. And instead of letting that math become the entire story of your worth or your future, you let it be one traffic jam among many. Real, worth taking seriously, but not the whole helicopter view of your life. It looks like the argument with your spouse that starts to escalate and both of you reaching for your weapons, the old wounds, the low blows, the things you know will land, and then somewhere in the middle of it, one of you remembers verse 9. Be still and know that I am God. And you stop and you lay down your weapons. Not because the disagreement doesn't matter, but because peace was never going to come from who won. It looks like sitting in a waiting room, phone face down in your lap because you can't stand to look at one more headline, and letting yourself notice for just a moment that the fans are whirring, that the lights are humming, and the person next to you offers you a mint, and somewhere outside this room, the sun is still doing exactly what it's always done. Now, that noticing is not denial. It's the bird's eye view, finding its way into your body for just a second, long enough to breathe. Now, I think, especially today, at a table like this one, where we'll experience outside of the barbecue, maybe a paper plate in our hand, people from Waterdown and Burlington and Oakville and Hamilton, you're meeting for the first time. I think it looks like this exact meal, a shared table. It's one of the oldest ways that human beings have ever practiced the God's eye view. You cannot stay entirely at war with someone whose potato salad you're eating. Something in us softens low and slow over food shared. And that's not an accident. It's the very same logic as this whole psalm. The raging water becomes the river that makes the city glad. The stranger becomes the neighbor. The weapons get set down so that both hands are free to hold a plate and shake the hand of a friend. And none of this is pretending. And I want to be very clear about that, because I know some of you have been handed a version of faith that asked you to smile through things that deserved your grief, or your anger, or your fear. Now, this psalm doesn't ask that. And I'm not asking you that. But it asks something harder, and I think kinder, to look straight at the wreck, to name what's actually wrong, the bills, the silence at your table, the diagnosis, the argument that keeps circling back. But then, without looking away from any of it, lifting your eyes just far enough to remember there's a wider view than one your fear is currently handing you, that there are clear skies over parts of your life you're too worried to notice right now, and that the whole earth, wrecked traffic and all, is still somehow stubbornly, according to a prophet who said it in the middle of the very same Assyrian terror, full of the glory of God. We might be tempted more than we've ever been to believe our security is something we build ourselves with strategy or savings or vigilance or whatever that looks like, locked doors. But it is true for a family quietly stockpiling worry, as it is for a nation stockpiling weapons. Both are two sizes of the same attempt to hold up the sky ourselves. Families do it by working past exhaustion. But Psalm 46 looks at both and says, put it down. Not because the danger isn't real, but because you never were the one holding the sky up in the first place. Now, Isaiah, he was preaching in the same shadow of terror. But in every moment that was as frightening as ours, he kept saying the same thing on repeat, almost like he couldn't stop it himself. And if you look at this earth on the screen, you can understand what he might have been thinking. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty. The whole earth is filled and full of his glory. Not half the earth, not the safe half, the whole earth, the wrecked half, the clear half, both. So hear this, all of you, whether you're carried here on a paper plate yourself this morning, for those of you holding up the sky with your own two hands, work-worn and not sure how much longer you can do it. Maybe those of you who are doing the quiet math in the parking lot. God is for you. God is for people. God is for the people around you. For your life, specifically, this particular life he brought you through, not the abstract idea of humanity and not the geopolitical realms that we talk about most. And that even though the nations rage, even though we might have our own private nations in our world raging too, God can still be trusted. And that we know this because of Jesus, who did not reach for a sword even once, who gave up his own life rather than pick one up, and who says we're not meant to hold the sky. We're meant to walk our ordinary paper plate, grocery list, carpool line lives, connecting people to God and each other, one remarkable Tuesday at a time. It is not a controversial thing to say that Christians are called toward peace and toward care for a hurting world instead of conforming to its patterns. But right now, in this particular moment, it's saying it out loud is something close to radical. It's radical to lift your neighbor's eyes and your own above the wreck, to remind each other gently again and again that God always runs towards peace, that God is for your peace. So I close with the invitation this morning, plain as I can put it. Be still. Throw down the weapons that you've been carrying. Let God hold the sky up for once. And let this table that we're about to partake in, this ordinary meal we're about to share with people we've only just met, be one small, real, radical bite of the peace this whole psalm has been promising all along. Be still and know that He is God.